name's Bob Bird, and I read my little biography, I hope. I've been teaching 40 years. I am now semi-retired, and I teach 2 classes a day in what can only be fairly described as the most outside-of-the-box presentation of U.S. history and U.S. government to high school juniors and seniors. It's a very unique situation that I teach at Nikiski High School, which might be the most conservative school in the entire state, perhaps the entire nation. I don't know. Anna, Texas has probably got some pretty good schools there too, but I know I'm happy where I'm at. And I know that my school board, my superintendents, my principals like what I'm doing because they make sure that their students take my classes and beg me to stay on. Is it will be, please not hesitate at any moment to say, well, what about what I thought, and so on and so forth. That's good. I'll take questions all the time. I do want you to know that I teach in an auditorium about the size of the one downstairs every day now, and they pack all the seniors, about 45 of them, in the school, into one class. So it's in the auditorium, and I have a microphone, and I have what's called a smart board. It's huge. I work a little bit clumsily here with the techie in back. I don't even know your name. All right, thank you, Jared. So, now what I'm going to tell you is that aside from the fact that I run for the U.S. Senate twice, and I do enjoy life because I'm a radio broadcaster in sports, and I hunt and fish and do all these kind of things. I've been in the pro-life movement since about 1980. And I've had to unlearn many things about our government. And my seniors, I borrow this from the famous movie The Chase, where Jim Houseman talks to lawyers coming into Harvard Law School. You enter this classroom with a brain filled with mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer. And I tell my students, you enter my class with a filled with mush, and you will exit a thinking citizen. You may not agree with everything I've said, but you will have an entirely different structure of understanding what is wrong and how we can fix it. Politically, we have been filled with mush, humbug, hooey, dooey, and louie. Like, I got a 3-story home, and if somebody big or important was going to come, I got to clean the house. And we would, main floor first. And if we kept them on that main floor, we could show how beautiful everything was. But don't go downstairs, or don't go upstairs, you know. That's an apparently clean job, but we know better. So when we have seen the mess of abortion on demand, euthanasia, and infanticide, ugly closer and closer, and how the government has foisted this upon us, we have gone ahead and cleaned one floor up, and it's not cleaning the house. My effort here, and see, I need a full semester to do this with seniors. How can I do that in 90 minutes here? I've done it in 2-day seminars in Fairbanks and in Kenai. I've done them in 3-hour seminars here in Anchorage. Last week, I spoke at the Lusac Library for 90 minutes on nullification, which is going to be part and parcel of the pro-life movement. And last year, I helped push a bill here, which the legislature passed regarding gun rights. We can't agree on everything in Alaska except guns. We're a liberal as a person who has a pistol smaller than a .357. That's Wayne Ross. All right. So this is a question and answer done 6 years ago. It's still online. I copied it. What's the biggest problem we have? And I said, the idea that the Constitution is a living document is the biggest misconception of all. If the Constitution can morph into anything we want it to be, then it is not written. Most college or history textbooks about the U.S. Constitution or government, it says the Constitution is a living document. Words have meaning, and to reinterpret them is one of the reasons. Take the First Amendment, scroll down, please. Next one. The so-called Bill of Rights should really be called the Bill of Limitations on Federal Power. The seldom studied preamble to the Bill of Rights. Those amendments should only apply to the federal government, not the states. Is this new to you? Go to an NRA group and I say, where did you get your Second Amendment rights? And I go, where do you get your right to keep and bear arms? I know. Second Amendment. Trapdoor opens, you fall into a crocodile pit. You do not get your right to keep and bear arms from the Second Amendment. It doesn't even say that. The Second Amendment says the right shall not be infringed is a pre-existing right. If the Second Amendment said, we hereby the right to keep and bear arms, what the government giveth, the government can taketh away. So the Second Amendment's better than that. Most people go, so, keep going. Good presidents, bad press. Stop. Keep going. Keep going. Oh yeah, as a pro-life activist, seem to be against the national abortion ban and favor states' rights. If so, what would be the greater evil? Allowing abortion to continue in some liberal states or using the federal government to ban it nationwide? Scroll down, please. A little bit too far. Okay, all right, no, that's fine. A nationwide solution to stop abortion is no solution. Keep going up. Here are some problems with it. Can you find? And changing majority, win every election. Solution. It would rely on court interpretations, more trouble. Executive willingness to enforce it. Would you trust President Obama to do so before he was president? A constitutional amendment would admit that the Supreme Court had the lawful authority to interfere with this question in the first place. Bad premise. We got abortion on demand all pregnancy from overweening federal power. The solution is not to create more federal power, which is what Life Amendment would do, but to reduce it. Federal power created to do something good has always turned into something ugly or unintended. Imagine reproductive bureaucrats such as exist in China. They might visit women each month and require to check on menstrual cycles for pregnancy. Then you might have to prove your miscarriage wasn't an induced abortion. You want that? And my thesis, the 19th century physicians' crusade against abortion, shows that pro-life doctors back then understood that states could manage these difficult social questions the best. Finally, we should be these United States, not the United States. That's a shock. In a properly functioning federal republic, we keep the scope of federal power to foreign policy, trade, and defense. With a myriad state-to-state defense of unborn human life, we would be spared a sweeping one-size-fits-all legislative and judicial tyranny against defendants. I want you to think about 50 states as a meshwork, not as parallel seams which can be ripped apart very easily. With mesh, it holds together. But what Roe versus Wade did was rip it all out. Now, if you click off that, please, and underneath this thing should be my earlier essay. So you can understand. There we go. There we go. Now, I'm going to lay it all out to you right at the start. I've begun that. But what I want to do is to let you know where I'm coming from, and then you're going to say, show me. Show me the proof. Show me the historical or the constitutional documents that sustain this. Okay? I hope using the right to keep and bear arms was How many people found that all of a sudden a click? You thought you got your right to keep and bear arms in the Second Amendment. Raise your hand if you thought your right to keep and bear arms came from the Second Amendment. It didn't. So if you already knew that wasn't so, that's good. Here. The only way to overturn a Supreme decision is a constitutional amendment. These words uttered by Nat Committee, Jack Wilkie, and many others. That's what we thought. We were taught that in high school, in college. We were taught it by the people we trusted. Oh, please get us out of this abortion wilderness as quickly as possible. All right. Next paragraph. Certainly after the election of Ronald Reagan, it looked like the entire sordid mess. Surprise, it was not. Millions of pro-lifers marching, picketing, counseling, laboring every year believe in this strategy as firmly as they do as every other. We've got to stop that. I really believe we need a spiritual revolution to stop abortion. But the political thing has got to be in the slipstream. And we have got to understand, what can we do right now? We're going to work for a constitutional amendment. It's so hard to get a constitutional amendment. Stop. It's a waste of time. 45, 42 years ought to be enough. So how can we stop it? All right, next paragraph. It is time to abandon for what it is, at best, at worst, a deliberate and sinister attempt to pour untold human resources and time and treasure. I hope that's not true. The older I get, the more it is. At best, totally useless. I look upon us pro-lifers as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She's told by the good witch Glinda that her ruby slippers enabled her to go home all along, anytime she wanted. Why didn't you tell me? Said Dorothy. You wouldn't have believed me. And I think that's where the pro-life movement is ready to start believing this now. Next. All right. Frankie Schaefer gave a speech 25 years ago. He walked the pro-life movement. It is risking being institutionalized. It should be in the business of going out of business. And we do have an institutional pro-life movement. They are scared to death of this strategy. I'll be explaining why. The trick to overturning Roe is not with a constitutional amendment. Let's pretend with a swing of a magic wand we got that amendment tomorrow. What good would it do us? And I would say, not much. Why? Tone that laughter down. Look at the ironclad guarantees of the Second Amendment. Promises the federal government won't interfere with our right to keep and bear arms. With that in place, yeah! Oh, they do anyway. It's paper. Next, go to the Fourth Amendment. Ask yourself the next time you fly if the TSA is obeying it. No. We'll have the Fourth Amendment. You bring up the Fourth Amendment and show it to a TSA agent, you will miss your flight. Next. First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech. Yeah, sure it does. When was the last time you heard a prayer at a public school affair? In Texas, they want to have a prayer before a football game. They have a loudspeaker truck outside the stadium. Everyone shuts up and they blast it with a Baptist preacher. Outside the stadium. There's some that do that. Scroll, please. Now check out the 10th Amendment. I'm not going to go into that. But trust me, it's not being followed. All right, which limit the federal government to doing any welfare or anything. Having a constitutional amendment is arduous and tortuous. If you didn't know, you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 75% of the state legislatures to approve a constitutional amendment. If you had a wonderful pro-life House and a wonderful pro-life Senate, California, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Washington, Oregon, no. They want us to waste time on this. Keep going. And as I said in that earlier talk, envision China's family planning system now with a pro-life instead of a pro-death outcome. It wouldn't look much different. A woman misses her menstrual period. How do we know? Why, it's up on the factory or office chart, and a local employee charged with the title pregnancy officer or some such knows the score. Then comes the visitation from a bureaucrat who will determine if she's been using an abortifacient drug device. Cervix has recently been violated. You didn't expect that if you got a human life amendment. I don't know if we'd get it. You better consider that whenever you create a power to do something good, you also create a power to do something bad. And when you give thanks to the federal government, it does not turn out right in most cases. So, if you're convinced the constitutional amendment will not be coming down the pike soon, and 55 million dead babies requires something more immediate, or an amendment will yield unintended or ugly results, or 3, it will likely be enforced selectively, if at all, welcome to the new, more effective, and more immediate pro-life strategy. The secret is nullification. All right, what is nullification? That's spent all last winter talking about it, radio, TV, columns, all over the state. The legislature accepted the idea. They faced the reaction from the increasingly useless and diminishing influential Anchorage Daily News. Oh, it held legislators hostage. All you have to do is see what they did to John Lindauer, which Wayne Ross and Robin Taylor predicted would happen. They were protecting John Lindauer until he defeated Ross and Taylor in the Republican primary, and then trust me, but they can't do that anymore because of the internet. All right, now I'm going to go through some pictures. If you click off that essay right now, and I want you to go to there's Calhoun. Go to there. There's the Capitol Dome, and go ahead and enlarge that. That's fine, because we always think that's where the problem came from. That's where we got to solve it. All right. Now there is a chance that we can get a federal retreat from abortion rights with us all, and I'm going to discuss the efforts that have happened. All right. The old strategy, the false premise that the Supreme Court has the lawful authority to outlaw state abortion laws. They don't. They don't. But you see, to understand where we went wrong, I used to think, FDR, that's it. That's where it went wrong. That's only clearing off the first floor of my messy house. Oh, I had to admit, Lincoln did it. Lincoln? Yeah. That's clearing off the top floor. But if you really want to snuff out the fog and clean up the house, we have to admit the Constitution has been violated immediately. And you'll go with, I have the good Alexander Hamilton, who wrote the Federalist Papers, and the bad Alexander Hamilton. It's sort of like he was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I'm a Hamilton cheerleader when it comes to the Federalist Papers, and as soon as he was made Secretary of the Treasury, he convinced George Washington, deserves part of the responsibility, to sign into effect the Bank of the United States. No authority in the Constitution. And he and Jefferson fought tooth and nail. But let's talk about what the federal government can do. All right. The first thing they tried was a constitutional amendment. Didn't get out of committee in the 70s, but the Helms Human Life Bill attempted to use the 14th Amendment because personhood is recognized in the 14th Amendment. And yet, the Supreme Court used the 14th Amendment to create Roe versus Wade. Many people read the 14th Amendment, and it's obviously done in Reconstruction to grant citizenship to ex-slaves. And yet it is now being given to grant citizenship to what's called anchor babies. An illegal immigrant sneaks into the United States, delivers a baby, and the 14th Amendment says that they were born in the United States. They are therefore a natural born citizen. Nevertheless, that's the way it's being interpreted. But far more fundamentally, the bad news is the 14th Amendment is illegally part of the Constitution. It is provable in 1 minute. I've gone on TV and radio to say the 14th Amendment is illegally part of the Constitution. The South was denied its representation in the Congress until they approved the 14th Amendment. You cannot deny, after the Civil War, you cannot deny a state the right to be represented in Congress. So they said, but you're not. You seceded. Now you can have it that way. You don't come in until you approve the 14th Amendment. But if you're not a state, how can you approve an amendment? They understood it immediately at that time. New Jersey complained about it. They understood it in the 1950s and 60s, where you can read in the congressional record where senators stood up and said the 14th Amendment is illegally part of the U.S. Constitution. You could read it now in all kinds of Yale and Harvard legal papers, online. A third grader can see it. But we have to accept that it is. I would suggest, if you think that the 14th Amendment, well, that stopped racial segregation. Oh, it did. And it's accepting the 14th Amendment's advantages, and believe me, there were. Just like if my house burned down at 40 below and I somehow escaped, I could say, thank God my house burned down. I can keep warm here until help comes. Because right now, the 14th Amendment is preventing Christians from saying to a homosexual couple, I'm sorry, I don't want to make you a wedding cake, but here's somebody who will. I'm sorry, I don't want to take pictures at your wedding, but here's somebody who will. They're being prosecuted. Well, the myriad ways the 14th Amendment has been used, if we thought, well, okay, they did the abortion thing, you think it's going to stop there? It's going right into your personal life. So we really should question the 14th Amendment's legality. Don't take my word for it. Study it on your own. Let's click off there for a minute. I want you to show me John C. Calhoun, because he is the man who is considered the only one who ever suggested nullification. And they love this picture of Calhoun. He looks fierce. I'm John C. Calhoun, and I own slaves, so I must be evil. He was one of the greatest minds the U.S. Political system ever produced, and he was vice president, and he put together a wonderful treatise called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. It was nullification. And I won't go into it right now, but Calhoun is usually thrown right into a person like me who advocates nullification. That's the pie in the eye I get. What about Calhoun? Pow! No nullification's been used by northern states who did not want to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. Do you want to know how bad that was? If a fugitive slave escaped to the north and you were a farmer, and the sheriff said, Farmer Jones, I'm sorry, there's a runaway on your property. We need your help to track him down. Raise your right hand. I'm going to deputize you. You know, no, I'm not going to cooperate in gaining a runaway slave or the owner. If you refuse that deputization or refuse to assist, you are liable for federal penalties and fine and or imprisonment. And Wisconsin, Massachusetts, everybody resisted. Go to that poster, you'll see there how they resisted tyrannical laws. There's a poster, there it is. Enlarge that. Caution, colored people of Boston, one and all, you're hereby respectfully cautioned with what? They're kidnappers and slave catchers. And many people resisted. Perfectly legal. The state legislature would not cooperate. In Wisconsin, the state legislature said, "Picture comes here, our local sheriffs are going to arrest you. And any slave that's caught is going to get a jury trial, and the jury would not buy him back into slavery." No, nullification has, I listened to one person down on Homer last year who said, I'm embarrassed and ashamed that people are talking about nullification. And then I said, Homer used to have on the city limits, it said, welcome to Homer, nuclear-free zone. Were you in favor of that? I said, yeah. I said, well, you were nullifying nukes, weren't you? By the way, do you think you're going to stop the federal government from bringing in nuclear bombs if they wanted to? No, you're not. Of course, they had no reason to bring them there, so it was sort of like sticking your tongue out at an ogre who's not paying any attention to you, and you go back and say, see what I did? I stuck my tongue out at him. All right? Yes.
What was the motive of the Washington?
In 1850, I'm not pro. I want people to understand that. The South bears its responsibility for that damn war. And their number one responsibility is miles out of Mexico. They wanted new slave states. And when the question now came, after would Arizona, Mexico, and California be slave states or free states, that's where we almost had war in 1850. And the only reason why it was averted is because they told the South, chill out, we promise we'll start, like the Constitution said, enforcing the fugitive slave law by making people chase them down. Without that, and it was Stephen A. Douglas, not Henry Clay, who forged out the compromise. The Union would have dissolved, not in 1861, but in 1850. So that's why that law came out. It was to save the Union. The Constitution said in 1789 that all runaway slaves have to be yielded. A Southerner would go into Philadelphia, New York, and say, look at here, I see blacks all over the streets. How come y'all ain't obeying the Constitution? Yes. I beg your pardon? That they had to, that the state that had a runaway had to turn it over. Yes, it's in the Constitution. No, it's in the federal Constitution. They would not have put together the Constitution without acquiescing certain concessions to slaveholding states, which, by the way, in 1789, all states had legal slavery. The North just started finding out what didn't pay, and they voluntarily got rid of slavery, state by state. Okay? So, let's go to the Helms Human Life Bill was going to say, as per the 14th Amendment, we find out that the unborn child is a person, which of course it already is in every inheritance law in all 50 states. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, so you see, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. It's like trying to make dry wetness or round square. That's what Roe versus Wade is. It's an oxymoron. And that's why the courts have lost legitimacy. But be careful, because we should have immediately said, well, I don't care what the courts say. What's the next federal solution? It's been tried. And this is from Ron Paul. I want you to find Ron Paul's essay, please. Over here. He is the only one who actually tried to stop abortion the right way from the federal level. And he got nowhere with supposedly a pro-Senate and a pro-life president. Okay, that's, as an obstetrician, I've delivered over, he wrote this in 2003. Scroll down, please. Keep it at that size. Keep going. I've become increasingly concerned over the years that the pro-life movement I so strongly support is getting further off track, both politically and morally. I sponsored the original pro-life amendment, which used a constitutional approach to solve the crisis of federalization of abortion law by the courts. The pro-life movement was with me and had my full support and admiration. Keep going. Those who cherish unborn life have become frustrated by our inability to overturn a significantly curtailed Roe. Because of this, attempts were made to fight abortion using political convenience rather than principle. There's nothing wrong per se with fighting winnable battles, but a danger exists when political pragmatism requires the pro-life movement to surrender important moral and political principles. Next. When we surrender constitutional principles, we do untold damage. Commenting upon the link between our most important rights, Jefferson said, "The God which gave us life gave us the same liberty." Next. Now I want you to see, the genius of the Constitution is its division of powers. You have been taught, oh yeah, I know that. That's the legislative and the president and the courts. Wrong paradigm. It's the states and government, with the states having the superior position. And if you go back to the tripartite, legislative, presidential, and courts, amongst those three, you've been told, well, okay, but those are three equal. No. There is nothing that the courts can do to enforce their opinions. And yet Ronald Reagan said, well, my oath of office requires that I enforce all Supreme Court decisions, even those I don't agree with. I actually had Pat Buchanan in Kenai for a day. We drove around town. He was chief of staff when Reagan was in his first term. I said, Pat, that's constitutional nonsense. He says, I know. I said, what were you thinking? He said, we weren't. He said, I'll do you one better. A president doesn't even need to enforce a statutory law, let alone a court decision. He admitted that. I won't go into how this played out, but people know this. All right? Now, pro-lifers should be fiercely loyal to this system of federalism, because the very same Constitution that created the federal system also asserts the inalienable right to life. In this way, our constitutional system closely links federalism to the fundamental moral rights. The last sentence in that paragraph says, this is why the recent direction of the pro-life cause is so disturbing. Scroll, please. Pro-life forces have worked for the passage of bills that disregard the federal system, such as the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, the federal cloning ban, the Child Custody Protection Act. Each of these bills rested on specious, which means shaky, constitutional grounds and undermined the federalism. Each of these bills transfers to the federal government powers constitutionally retained by the states, thus upsetting the separation and balance of powers that federalism was designed to guarantee. To undermine federalism is to directly surrender the very principle upon which the protection of our inalienable right to life depends. The worst offender is the Unborn Victim of Violence Act, which not only indirectly surrenders the pro-life principle, but actually directly undercuts the right to life by granting a specific exemption to abortionists. Trying to save some of these lives, this exemption essentially allows some to take life with the sanction of federal law. By supporting this legislation, pro-lifers are expressly condoning a legal exemption for abortionists. Partial birth abortion ban, keep scrolling. We'll keep scrolling. What should the pro-life community do? First, we must return to the constitutional principles and proclaim them proudly. We must take a principled approach that recognizes both moral and political principles. We should focus our efforts to overturn law. But you got to be careful. If there's the next federal approach, the one that's far more likely to happen. The Supreme votes fight or over to. Careful. If it isn't worded properly like this, the court finds that it had no authority to overturn state laws. Yes. But if it just says, well, we find now that personhood is granted to the unborn, the problem is we're still accepting the fact that the Supreme Court giveth or taketh away, so that when it's reconstituted with some other pro-abortion president or pro-abortion Supreme Court justices, we have agreed that that's the system that we play by. And so we will be whipsawed from a pro-life court, another election, different appointments, a lot of shouting and screaming. Judge Bart, Clarence Thomas, we got a pro-abortion majority. They will reverse the reversal, thus nationalizing the abortion issue. It should never have done so. You might say, well, I can't live in a country that's got legal abortion, 9 months of pregnancy. You do now. I want to start saving lives now, and as wonderful as sidewalk counseling and picketing and crisis pregnancies, that's nibbling. You want to do something effective? How about, let's go with those maps. The first one I want is not, go with that one, yes. That is a map that shows you where abortion was before Roe versus Wade. I need some water, if you please. All right? And Alaska, which we're about to put our focus on, that's, I think it's a dark color. Yes, it is. Dark color. As bad as New York. All right? Then the next map shows you what Planned Parenthood thinks. Well, we'll look at that one because that's, all right, go ahead. Good. Planned Parenthood says this is the way, what it's going, that's not the one. Here we go. Post-Roe world. After Roe versus Wade is repealed, what will it look like? The dark states are the ones that keep it pretty radical. The gray states, maybe they'll have rape and incest exceptions. Maybe significant parental consent. Maybe stopping it at the first trimester at least. Imperfect. Better than what we have now. And the other ones, that's a big chunk, all throughout the South except for North Carolina. Life of the mother. Why is Alaska a dark state? It's because of our state constitution of Article 1, Section 22. Now, at this point, I hope it's much better to take 45 minutes a day for a week to explain all of this messing up of the federal system that we have been taught, that we accept. I talked to a state senator a few weeks ago, and he said, well, I was taught that the three branches are equal. And I said, well, so was I. Time now to unlearn. Okay. Now I would like you to find Article 1, Section 22 of the state constitution. And I want you to understand how you can do something. I'm not going to worry about Connecticut. I live in Alaska. And God sees the big picture. A sweeping thing, clear all of their loose from all these baby killers. It's not happened. You are young and you think, oh yeah, I'm just, or probably by my age, you would realize. Been there, done that. Now what do we do? This is why even Planned Parenthood, and I have to tell you, we got a wonderful legislature. It's the majority's pro-life, and I think they would love to put some sort of restrictions on abortions. And what they do is go, Alaska's got a right to privacy clause. You can't do it. So I'm about to tell you the sordid mistaken history in Alaska. Here is Section 1, Article 22. It is the Declaration of Rights in our state constitution. You've never read it. Right? And it says, the right of the people to privacy is recognized and shall not be infringed. The next part. Highlight that. Yes. Yes. Just that? Yes. Yes. The legislature shall implement this section, which they never have done. And I've gone to Lauren Lehman when he was a senator. Can't do it. I don't know. There's the votes aren't there. Whatever. Stop! It doesn't say the courts shall shall implement this section, and yet that is exactly what our legislature has done. They have abdicated the definition of, everyone agrees there's limits on every right. There's limits to the right to privacy. You don't have the right to beat your children with a crowbar in the privacy of your own home. Should you use that? Do you want paterfamilias? Which is what Roman law said. Very interesting. You could beat your wife and your children, father of the family, in ancient Rome, known very well for its excellent legal system. They had paterfamilias. If you beat your children or kill them or your wife, the law was not interested unless you beat the wife and children of your neighbor. So we agree. We don't want that. Talk to a Planned Parenthood. They don't want it. Good. We got some common ground. Where do you want to put the limits to the right to privacy? So everyone wants limits. The controversy is where. So they have allowed the courts to define abortion as the right to privacy. I'm sure they used Roe versus Wade. Of course, Roe versus Wade didn't really use the 9th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that we can't list all of your rights. That's good. You can't. Okay? So they said, well, one of those rights that they didn't list was abortion. So my guess is the judicial clones in the Alaska court system have used Roe to say, well, that's it. We got the right to privacy recognized, and abortion is now part of that. So that's why they think Alaska is a safe state. But we have a trump card. It is, all right, pro-life legislator, put limits on the right to privacy and say the right to privacy as secured in this Constitution does not include the right to abortion. Wow! There will be much hissing and weeping and gnashing of teeth from the increasingly diminished influence of TV and the Anchorage Daily News. We have the votes, but I want to caution you to this attitude. Well, the courts have already defined that, and we got to change the courts. I listened to Sarah Palin say that. Nonsense. Nonsense. The legislature is clearly empowered by the Constitution to define it. The fact that they have allowed case law to define it is their mistake. Fix it. Starting now. That's doable. What about Roe versus Wade? Nullification comes in. And where the personhood bills come in. And I'm not, I haven't heard the personhood presenter yet. But every time a personhood bill is introduced in the state legislature, either as a bill or as a constitutional amendment to a state constitution, because they're all different, you understand? The institutional pro-life movement screams, pulls their skirts up, and jumps up on a table like they saw a mouse. Because they go, oh no, we can't challenge Roe directly. No, because that'll go down the pike to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they will further ensconce the right to abortion if we dare to challenge them directly. And I say, challenge them directly. Courage. David, get your 5 smooth stones. Who knows what, we got allies that aren't even pro-life or all, I know pro-abortion people who want Roe versus Wade overturned only because they know that that is a usurpation of states' rights. They know that. Income tax people understand these things. They may not be pro-life, a lot of them are, but they go, yeah, we got to stop the courts from dictating to the states these issues. Because they understand the principle that they get a court that to accept nonsense. We're going to have a black and blue session on the state level. It will reduce it to a much more workable load. Okay, so there is the first thing. We can, Article 1, Section 22, to let the legislature start defining it. I had a 1-hour conversation with a state senator who just this week responded with a personal phone call to me that said, I didn't understand it. Could you explain it again to me? But I can tell you, my mission here, see, is to awaken as many citizens as I can that this is how we attack it. Okay, and well, the first thing we have to clear out is let the legislation define where the parameters are to the right to privacy. The idea of challenging the Court of the United States, believe me, is happen if it's not. That's where we're going to find allies. But the whole thing. Okay. Now I want to talk to you about a court decision of 2001 to show you the total misunderstanding of courts, even on the state level. In 2001, after years of bickering, dithering, debating, the state legislature ended funding for abortion. Now, Ed will tell you that when Walter Hickel was elected in 1990, he went straight to him and asked, why haven't you parsed out abortion funding? And before he took a chair or something at for disturbing him about this question, the answer, I think, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, was that they can't separate it from general Medicaid funding. Yes?
I don't think he got a contract. I just couldn't do it. He refused to ask his first two times. Reminding him of mortality. That's the God.
That's what got you chased out of his office.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think that's the answer. But by 2001 or 2000, they had done it. And they had steamroller Tony Knowles veto. You understand, when you have a liberal pro-abortion person who's governor or president, you actually can get a better legislature or Congress because people are so outraged. And so they stopped abortion funding. Knowles tried to stop the stopping of it. They overruled him, and we stopped abortion funding. Yay. Then Knowles' appointee, please remember this, he's still on the court, Sen Tan. He is an Asian who moved here, and he said, you instate abortion funding as per 1 Section 22. Where it said, Article 2, the legislative power of the state is vested in a legislature. It does not say is invested in the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the courts. This is court-ordered funding. Okay? Keep scrolling down here. Communities, legislators. Too far. Stop. Regular session. Keep going. Adjournment, interim committees. Keep going. Rules, form of bills, passage of bills, veto. I want to see if this action upon veto. Bills not signed. Keep going. I want to see about. Okay. All civil officers of the state are subject to impeachment by the legislature. Originate in the Senate, must be approved by 2/3. Motion for impeachment. Okay. And go now to, that is the dealing of the legislative power. 20 members of the Senate to the House. Okay. Go to Article 3, please. I'm sorry. Go to Article 4. There we go. Larger. The judicial power of the state is vested in the Supreme Court, a superior court, and the courts established by the legislature. Trumpets, please. And I want to see this word here. I think it says that's it. The jurisdiction of the court shall be prescribed by law. It's not even in the Constitution. The legislature will pass statutes that say where they can and can't. If they wrote a statute that said courts may order funding for schools, despite the fact that the legislature refused it. They could do that. Oh, but they haven't. They haven't. So what Judge Santan did was utterly unconstitutional. He ordered abortion funding for medically necessary abortions. Now, a year ago at this time, I went blue and black in the face to get some very influential pro-life lawyers, pro-life interest groups to say, stop trying to define what medically necessary abortions are, because you are then accepting Judge Santan's interpretation. You are obeying him to try and save a tiny bit. Stop trying to nibble at the edges. If Can defies the Constitution, legislature defy Can.
Why didn't they do it?
Because they won't listen to this. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm sorry, I'm too old. I'm a bit cynical. I think there are people who, from the start of the pro-life movement, wanted to make sure it lost as slowly as possible. The institutionalization of the pro-life movement is a great danger, which is why we have to forget about the National Right to Life Committee. 25 years ago, they lost my confidence.
My question to you is, why did the legislature allow them to do that?
I think I answered that. Bob said the legislative movement that is not polite. Like yesterday, I went to the 13, we got elected at that first place. A lot of them, they want to be polite and they know the courage is not there. There's two issues, there's ignorance of this issue and there's
Here it is. I can't do anything about it. It's the course. But if you keep electing me, I will try and do everything I can.
But what sense is it unconstitutional?
Of course it was, but they all obeyed it because they think, like many people still do, good people believe, well, if the court said it, we got to obey it. It's Ronald Reagan. Well, my oath of office, no, it doesn't require you to obey a Supreme Court decision. He's the only one. I got on the cell phone immediately. He said, Jerry, what the heck's going on? Get those guys fired up. He couldn't get anybody fired up. Yes. Yes, we've got to give it to them. Talk to them about Article 1, Section 22, and talk to them about Santan. So they wasted, I don't know how many people they brought in from the outside to talk about what medically necessary abortion was. But you are saying, and I wrote this in a column, and it appeared in the Catholic Anchor. I know there's a lot of people who are non-Catholic read it. It's still online, and it said, this is a trap. It's accepting a system that is perpetuating the evil. It's Dorothy with the ruby slippers. All right. So, the whole judicial, now let's go down to the impeachment. It is. Impeachment of any justice or judge for malfeasance or misfeasance in the performance of official duties. Malfeasance means something, you're taking bribes. Misfeasance means you misunderstand your powers and you are going into areas where you shouldn't be. And you might say, correct it or we'll impeach you, and maybe they back off. That's what we need to do. But everyone, radical, we do this. Why is it in the Constitution then? And our enemies won't hesitate to do these things when it cuts in their favor. It's such a fundamental deconstruction of understanding how government is supposed to work between the states and the federal government, but now within our own state. Okay? Now I'd like you to go to Article 12, I believe. There's a little something there in Article, there it is. Scroll down, slowly. Oath of office, retirement system, residual power. There it goes, lawmaking power. As used in this Constitution, the terms by law and by the legislature or variations of these terms are used interchangeably when in regards to lawmaking powers. Unless clearly applicable, lawmaking powers assigned to the legislature may be exercised by the people through the initiative. Now we got another one in our hands, the initiative. I want you to go to Déjeuner. It's under a PDF.
issue of, for clarification, they're supposed to interpret that section to refer to only physical jurisdiction. I'm wondering, what is there any precedent for using that avenue to restrict the jurisdiction of the court?
They can do that legislatively. We saw that in Article 4. They can restrict the jurisdiction immediately.
Right, but what I'm asking is, there are some who interpret that Article 4 to refer to only physical jurisdiction, not just subject.
You're talking about the lawmaking power in Article 12 or Article 4?
And with the legislature prescribing the jurisdiction of the court.
Okay,
What does prescribing the jurisdiction mean?
that means they will lay out exactly the procedure for hearing a case and its appeal working its way down and where their powers go. I have not researched what work was done, maybe in the first legislature, to prescribe the power of the courts, because I think like Marbury versus Madison, reach out and grab for power as long as nobody stops them. Now, Marbury goes way back to 1803, and that is a fundamental overthrow of the Constitution. Marbury versus Madison is granting the courts the power to declare laws unconstitutional. They don't have that power. They certainly don't have it over the states. They did declare Dred Scott unconstitutional. Most people don't understand why the Dred Scott case was so controversial. But from Marbury to Dred Scott, that's 1803 to 1857, they didn't touch a single federal law. What was the Dred Scott case to make it controversial? Many people think, well, they declared that slaves were non-persons before the law, and it outraged the North. No, 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 and furthermore, no. The Dred Scott case said that here was the Southern viewpoint. If I can take a horse and a wagon into a territory because it's my property, then I can jolly well take a slave into the territories because it's my property. Therefore, all laws, like the Missouri Compromise, like the Northwest Ordinance of 1786, which outlawed slavery north of the Ohio River and north of the, were unconstitutional. You could not prevent a person from taking their slave then into New Mexico, into Arizona, into California. And the Supreme Court then declared federal laws to limit slavery into the territories as unconstitutional. That's why the North was outraged. And the North was not outraged because slavery was morally wrong. They were outraged because a slave system, one family owns a big plantation, and it's a cash crop plantation. Tobacco, indigo, cotton. Takes up 2,000 acres. Under the free family system, people wanted farms because they would be financially independent. That's why the family farm, 1 square mile, that's 640 acres. You'd have 4 families. 4 families taking care of themselves. Chickens, pigs, crops, garden. And that's why the North outpopulated the South by this time. Because people wanting to have a family farm, more people settle in Missouri, in Illinois, in Iowa, in Wisconsin, rather than in Mississippi. Most people in the South did not own slaves, but the best land was taken up by big plantations. It was an economic and a land rights issue. Yes, the moral issue came hot in the 1850s, but Lincoln was not against slavery for the moral reason. He was against it because of what was called the free soil reason. They wanted more land available to more settlers. So, but the Dred Scott case is a matter of the Supreme Court declaring a federal law. But the president doesn't need to enforce it. Buchanan, if he was anti-slavery, could have said, well, the Supreme Court has made their decision, now let them try to enforce it. You can go right ahead and keep slaves out of Kansas if you want, because I won't enforce it. He doesn't have to do it. See, we could have done that every time we had a pro-life president. You get a pro-abortion president, he could reverse it, but at least we'd be challenging the system. That's why a federal system, if you got a pro-life president, so I won't enforce Roe versus Wade, that's a good start, but he won't be in office. Could they impeach him for it? Sure they could. That's the risk you take. Jackson was. Jackson said about the Worcester versus Georgia decision, which granted property rights to the poor Cherokee Indians, he said, let the Supreme Court try to enforce it. And he, in charge of the Army, created the Trail of Tears and ripped those Cherokees out of their homeland in the Appalachians, dumped them into Oklahoma. An unjust decision, but constitutionally he understood who's going to stop him. And he had public opinion behind him. So, that's what we have to, where am I here? Oh, this is Desjardins. I want you to understand what happened. On his own initiative, wanted to start a citizen initiative, a personhood bill, wanted to get it on the ballot. And he'd have to go ahead and hustle the signatures. But he was stopped by pro-life Meade Treadwell, who said, Beak, abortion's legal according to constitutional law. It is not constitutional law. It is a warped interpretation by a court decision that had no right to do so. And so he said, I will not approve this.
Could you repeat what you just said there? I missed what you said.
Treadwell, Mario knows the case better than I, and he's in here, but the essence is this. I can't approve a citizen initiative that is contrary to the Constitution. Now let's take a citizen initiative that says, the state of Alaska shall print and coin its own money. You can actually find that as out of bounds in Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. Okay. So then we would be definitely, you can find chapter and verse where we can't have that power as a state, okay? But suppose the court said Jews are non-human. Would a president enforce that? Would Ronald Reagan say, well, I've got to enforce all Supreme Court decisions? That's how you got to compare it. Ask me, Treadwell.
Wait a minute.
If the Supreme Court,
Context here. This was a few years ago.
last 2 years maybe. I got the case there.
Made it
The lieutenant governor approves all citizen initiatives. Mario, anything to enlighten me, correct me on? And that now is going to be the operable law about any citizen initiative to challenge Roe versus Wade. And that's because we have pro-lifers who don't understand. I'm not asking them to understand natural law. They don't even understand constitutional law. And they think they do. But don't blame them. We have all been caught up in the same system. Now you walked into here today, and now for the first time maybe in your life, you've got the proper understanding of how it's supposed to have been. And that the courts, the federal courts, have very limited power. They have no prerogative to go into the states and decide their troublesome social issues the way those states want to. And if I have to live in a unified government regarding abortion, go to that map, please. The one that's all blue right there. Now that's the election of 1972. And I pretend this is colored blue because I don't want to do this. Don't touch anything. That's the only state that George McGovern won. I'm trying to get you to see a coast to coast. That's what we've got right now. We've got a coast-to-coast pro-abortion country because we live under the false paradigm that Oh, it'd be so confusing if we have to go different laws from different states. That's where freedom exists. And ladies and gentlemen, we have misunderstood what the United States is. And that is, I don't want to mess with a Jewish neighborhood's priorities in New York, a Baptist neighborhood's priority in East Texas, a Catholic neighborhood in Philadelphia, a Mormon neighborhood in Utah, a secular neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. That's not my business. I don't like what you're doing, but I am only going to worry about my corner of the garden, because I could force something down your throat that is totally onerous. And I take booze. You want prohibition? That's evil. It's bad. And they sold it. Did it stop wife beating? Did it end crime? We all know what it did. It created organized crime, which had already existed, but it gave it a terrific boost. I don't want that. That's what it once upon a time looked like regarding booze in this country. 1917 actually is when the Volstead Act was passed as a war measure. Let's go with a constitutional amendment. It turned ugly, didn't it? And it was supposed to be so wonderful. Okay, it turned ugly. That's why we have to be careful of we don't want a pro-life constitutional amendment. It's none of the federal government's business. Anyway, it's my business is my home. My home's Alaska. And what we'll decide will be a black and blue session. They'll be pushing and shoving. I might have to take a compromise and have imperfect bills. But by golly, I can save more lives than just sitting out in the shivering cold trying to once in a while get a leaflet into somebody's hand. And then they decide, that's great, that's good. God will reward that. But let's figure out the political strategy, young man.
I know the federal government can use, among other things, federal highway money to improve things into staying on one line across all of it. They did that with the drinking aid, various sorts of things. Have they done that with the work on?
I think we can expect it. They did to Gary Johnson, who was Republican governor of New Mexico at the time, when he said, we won't do No Child Left Behind. And they said, well, we're going to cut you off of federal funding. He said, that's fine. He thought they meant educational funding. No. All funding. He caved. He couldn't sustain that amongst the public opinion. Now, No Child Left Behind is seen as, never mind. Even the secular world denounces it. So that can be expected. And I'm going to tell you, the great challenge we have as Alaskans, and this has nothing to do with the abortion issue, if we were financially independent and permitted to develop our resources the way we could, without interference from Connecticut or New York telling us what to do with 65% of our federal lands here, we would not have to worry about federal funding. See, that whole thing is part and parcel. It's a tremendous system. Abortion is just one facet of it. To make ourselves, we have created a dependency. And I'll tell you this, every person who's dependent on a drug looks upon their drug dealer as their best friend. And love means you grab them away from that drug dealer. You hold their hand while they scream as they want their addiction met. And then tough love finds that person saying, thank you. I hated you. And now I love you. And that's what we have to see the federal government. And I'm going to tell you, I run against Ted Stevens. He was the biggest drug dealer in Alaska. He gave us, people hated me for it, I'm sorry. And I saw, aside from the fact he was, God rest his soul, generally pro-abortion. He gave us federal funding, which allowed us to say, we really don't need to develop this or develop that. We'll let this unconstitutional system in regards to federal property. But see, that prevents us and creates, you go to your favorite neighborhood pro-life legislator and you tell them, we need to defy Roe. No, they will say, they'll cut us off of federal funding. That'll eventually come to that. They'll understand that. What will we do? How will we fund our schools, our roads, and so forth? You go, defy their unconstitutional ownership of our state. They're permitted to own forts, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, not national wildlife refuges. They're popular, but they're not constitutional. It is a fundamental mistake we have made. And it's all interlocked. We have to, my effort, I don't care how small the audience is, I will drop everything and say this message over and over and over again. And I've got hundreds of my kids who have graduated. And many of them, I have a kid, I use him as my barometer. As a junior, he would hear me talk about the federal government. His default position was always to defend the government, defend the government. I'm an American, I'm a patriot, I'm red, white, and blue. And then we read the Bill of Rights word for word and fully understand the preamble to the Bill of Rights. And he said, oh, Mr. Bird, now I understand. But he couldn't do it. He had to come in as a senior the next year and have his brain filled with mush, changed, trying to stop. And I used my campaigns for the U.S. Senate to talk like this all over the place. And I have no idea what good it did. It did a little. And we have to understand that fight abortion locally and do it the proper way. As Ron Paul said, the federal system is our friend. Yes. Federal or state? Okay. Let's take Santan. That's why I used it. He ordered, and the legislature obeyed him. The one thing I didn't point out here is that if the legislature or the governor defied the court, show me the penalty for defiance of a court decision. Show me the penalty. Who will be expelled from the legislature leading a bill to defy it? How will the courts impeach the governor for failing to implement their decision? There is no penalty. But there is a penalty for malfeasance and misfeasance. To even introduce such a bill would get this reaction from a liberal court member. Oh, I'm sorry. But they've been protected by the Anchorage Daily News and the TV stations for too long, by the Associated Press, which will create an article that says, the blowhard senator trying to dare defy the Judge Santan's decision on the constitutionality of abortion funding. Wicked, anti-women person. People aren't reading that anymore.
Bob, to what benefit those media reporting that agenda? Were they getting some financial reward?
Because Jerry Ward was the only person who expressed an interest, and then I think he should be here, but I think he called and said, Bob, I'm just not lighting fires. They shrugged their shoulders. Okay?
I mean, I know we got liberal media, but
yeah.
What benefit are they trying
to? You're asking a very profound question as to where's, if you're thinking follow the money, I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that you'll follow the same philosophy, which is the government that governs most is the best for us. They know better for us. You have to have a black robe and a long face to piously pronounce what things mean. You are dweebs sitting in a log cabin reading a constitution. There's no way you are qualified. That's their attitude. Yes.
going back to what you said about it was part of Article 4 that the state constitution actually guaranteed that a legislator is not brought for any court proceedings for introducing.
Let's go to Article 4 and read that. I think got a good one there. Is that Article 4? Looks like it. Roll down or scroll down. No, that's Article 4 of the courts. You want Article 2 of the legislature? Article 2. Article 2. This is article immunities. Legislators may not be held to answer before any other tribunal for any statement made in exercise of the legislative duties of legislatures in session. Members going to, returning from, are not subject to civil process. That's a little bit different. What that means is this. Once upon a time, if you said out loud, I think you're a thief, no, you are a thief, that's slander. If I wrote about it and it was published, that's libel. They took that very seriously in the 19th century. They sometimes ended it with dueling, but there were lawsuits, all right? Suppose a legislator gets up and says, I think the governor is taking bribes. We need to investigate it. And then he finds out, oh, it was wrong. This protects him from being afraid to even bring it up because he will be sued. That's also in the federal Constitution. That was the intent at the time it was written. Okay? So they're trying to protect him from a lawsuit and being accused of slander. It was taken very seriously in the 18th and 19th century. Today, the courts have redefined what libel and slander are. You can actually print something that's a falsehood, but now they've got to prove that you did it knowing it was false. That was not the case in the 18th and 19th century. You're aware of what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, all right. So, any other questions here? I know I've probably overlooked something. What else is in that? Would you show me the whole file of things I've got there? Let's see. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Go here. Notification. Notification. How to resist federal tyranny in the 21st century. Thomas E. Woods is a very, very brilliant scholar. He's a devout Christian. You can find him on YouTube. Please watch the 35 to 45 minutes that you can find. You put down Tom Woods Nullification on YouTube. You can see him talking to sheriffs and telling them you don't have to enforce what the government says regarding gun control laws. The sheriffs can order the IRS and the FBI out of their county. They are superior to any federal power. More and more are understanding this, and I want to tell you, it's a very sinister problem that Alaska doesn't have counties, because counties immediately identified as such come under English common law, and English common law identifies the sheriff as the ultimate authority. We also need to approach our legislators to ask us change boroughs into counties and give them all the rights of English common law. That is something we are bringing up on the Kenai Peninsula. And the tremendous tyranny of the Internal Revenue Service is legendary. The SWAT teams. There have been sheriffs who have ordered SWAT teams out, and they pack up and they fold. They get out. They know that. And if you want Thomas Woods Nullification, look at what the subheadline will say in front of the Union of County Sheriffs or something. There were something like 175 sheriffs there. And that's all over the country. Understand. Okay? If you want freedom, you got to go local. You don't get it from sea to shining sea. You get it local. Yes. I'm afraid you have to become something of a pest. And instead of talking, would you please, we got to have our roads paved. It's all important. We need a new airport. Okay? See, they take their oath, and what they do is they look at this pie, and there's 60 legislators, and I should get at least 1/60th of that pie lie to come home with and say, see what I'm doing? But I got 5/60ths. I'm a good legislator. I don't want that now. I want my freedom. So we have to say Article 1, Section 22, please define abortion as outside the right to privacy. Do what the Constitution that you're sworn to uphold asks you to do. But don't you want to talk about roads and harbors? They like that much better. Don't we talk about Common Core and education? Article 1, Section 22. You, ma'am. Article 1, Section 20. Stop it. I don't want to hear about Article 1, Section 22. Only the widow with the unjust judge will wear them out. The widow has no power or influence. She's nothing. But she's a pest. And that's it. We must be a pest. They'll go from one community meeting after another. What about Article 1, Section 22? What about Santan? What about this useless medically necessary abortion law? Get out Santan! I got all kinds of nice response from the legislature last winter about gun control and nullification, and I talk about Santan and this medically necessary abortion. Silence, silence, silence. They don't want to be disturbed because it's controversial. Legislators don't like being controversial. They're bold and courageous. If you got a big paycheck for them and say, sue them. What? Some are, but a lot of them, we have a pro-life lieutenant governor who made a terrible decision. He made a terrible decision. And it will, because case law shouldn't be the overriding thing. See, here's the other thing, last thing. Hierarchy of law. But that's not taught in law school, even at Ave Maria, a hierarchy of law. The number one trump law should be natural law. And even people who don't have faith accept natural law. They accept it. They don't have to admit it comes from God or it comes from a church or whatever. They understand natural law. And they don't want to talk about natural law in the courts. Natural law should be the hierarchy of all law. Then comes constitutional law. Sometimes constitutional law can defy natural law like it did when ordering runaway slaves to be returned. That was written in, but that was contrary to natural law. Then comes statutory law. It's argued. It's read 3 times on the floor. It's a subject to committee amendments. It's debated. It's signed or vetoed by a governor. That's a statute. Then you have common law, which is unwritten law that's been accepted for centuries. The last operable thing is case law, which is how a bunch of lawyers in front of judges have interpreted law. And yet, that's the bottom, and the hierarchy, that's number 5, and it is now, it's magnetized to the top, above natural law, above constitutional. Am I wrong? The struck today, and good people are operating under this system. And by the way, let me tell you, no matter what happens, we live in an imperfect system. And no matter what happens, if we had a president say, I'm not going to enforce Roe versus Wade, the imperfect system, somebody might impeach him. It's not just. They got the right to do that. It's constitutional. Yes. Yeah, we do, surely. When 25 years ago, Thursday, we sat down in front of an abortion clinic and 92 of us got arrested. He and I organized it. We were resisting Roe versus Wade. We're also resisting trespass law is a good law, okay? But not in that case. That's where jury nullification might save it. You understand? The other thing I want to tell you about jury nullification. Guy's walking down the street and he hears in a house, help me, help, stop, somebody save me. And There's a fence that says, keep out, no trespassing. You jump that fence, kick the door in, and who did you? Oh, it's a soap opera. Now you are going to court, and the evidence is obvious. This guy defied the trespass law. And the judge says to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are not to decide whether or not Mr. Smith here is anything other than guilty of breaking the trespass law, which is a good law, okay? But you might decide not guilty. You would nullify in his case. That's one act of jury nullification. Another one might be, and they did this with the Fugitive Slave Act, which I refuse to try and chase down a runaway slave. Can you imagine this? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are not to decide whether or not slavery is right or wrong. You're only to decide whether or not Farmer Jones refused to chase down a runaway slave. That's the only thing you have to do. Well, the evidence piles up. He's guilty. No, but jury nullification says the law is unjust and you may stand in the way. You don't need all 12 jurors to agree. You need one. What's that? Yeah, trial law, you got to have 12. Got to be 12 to nothing. 10 to 2 won't convict. 11 to 1 won't convict.
Basically, jury nullification is you're judging the merits of the law and the merits of the state. But I think Joe has a concern about this, the reaffixing of the state in regards to.
And now I get to your question. Go ahead, Joe.
The problem in our state is that they require both groups to apply with construction. That was part of legislation. Otherwise, the claim and code would be taken for the state and approved. And so, even though jury nullification is part of our clearly our system from the very beginning, that emanates before the creation of the country, the reality of it is our legislatures need to get engaged to allow what to prohibit that the requirement of.
And New Hampshire passed a statute that permits the defense to bring up jury nullification. What we need, a good statute would be to allow jurors to know their rights. Okay, go ahead.
I was under the impression that, well, jury nullification is still technically valid in the field that and
Oh, yes.
generally, if you say you believe in nullification, then you take on.
I have been, personally.
So is that accurate?
Yes, it's accurate. Yeah. The one thing you have to understand is, and it says in the 7th Amendment, which is cloned in our state constitution, so that it applies to state law, no juror may be questioned by any other tribunal or court outside of the parameters of common law. So if you come down with a not guilty verdict in defiance of the judge's orders, they cannot question you. Common law allows the judge to question, did you take a bribe? Did you discuss the case before you were reclused? Did you listen to a radio report or read a newspaper? Did you lie about knowing the defendant? Okay, that's what common law permits, but you could still defy, and they can't ask you that question. They can't ask you, how did you reach this conclusion? So, but Joe's got a very important point, and I know that this normally happens in other states. The judge says, you are only to judge the facts of this case, not whether or not the law. Do you understand? And a juror can say, yes, I understand. It's not, will you obey? Yeah, here it's different, yeah. That's different than yes.
They require, they actually secure the confirmation of religious control of trust. And that's very common.
My sister actually got out of it. Because he asked it, and she said yes with a caveat, and that was non-constitutional. So he laughed. We asked him, how did you know it's constitutional? Well, I got one right here. Pull it out. Let him say I'm a juror. Not a lot of
last question? Yes? Oh, for Pete's sake, there's no restriction on the Senate. And Joe, when you're there someday, you may be sitting on one.
But they do, they go to the Constitution, that's not their constitutional duty, to decide whether the their constitution.
Right. That's correct. And they can blab all they want, unlike a pettit jury. They can tell you before the case even starts, I'm going to vote not guilty. And they did that in the Andrew Johnson impeachment, or I'm going to vote guilty. They can go ahead and say, I've made up my mind to any newspaper reporter. They are not under the same common law restrictions that a pettit juror, 12 angry men as it were, are operating under. They can blab all they want. And as a result, the impeachment of Clinton was compromised in almost an absurd fashion before the trial even began. You had the votes counted up.
I just wondered what example of
Well, it's a different context. I'd say that would be nullifying it, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's 1:30, and I'll be available for any discussions throughout the day. And here, thank you.